So, is it possible? Can we get a Dragon Ball game that could finally score more than an 8 out of 10 across the board? Hey folks, MasakoX here. Now I think that you know, quite handily, that Dragon Ball has a lot of video games, and we mean a lot of video games. And I'm not just including the ones that we had in the past, or that never made it to the Western markets. I mean, that would be too obvious. The games that we get in the non-Japanese markets are quite plentiful in of itself, if we take the whole thing into consideration. I think it's a safe call to say that Dragon Ball as a gaming IP is just as prominent as the animated and illustrated IPs, the anime and manga. Lots of the people know the franchise solely through the video games, barely touching the anime or manga, and that's okay. It gets the word out. And it's also not like we don't get quite a few more games coming every year, they still keep coming out. But with a franchise so massive, we tend to not only get things that are good, FighterZ, Fusions, Attack of the Saiyans, the Xenoverse series, sorta, mixed, Kakarot, Super Dragon Ball Heroes, but then we also get the outright bad. Dragon Ball GT Final Bout, First Legacy of Goku, Ultimate Battle 22, sagas. Now I can hear some of the skeptics out there questioning some of my choices for the respective sectors, but that's not what we're getting into today. We're not having a tier list here, we can talk about that another day. I also need to kind of play some of the more retro games to be fair when I get the chance to do so. And hey, if you actually want to check out this fun little fan-made Dragon Ball Mario Kart game, check out the link up top. It was surprisingly well done actually. But let's get back to the proper Dragon Ball games. While a large portion of the series portfolio are essentially fighting games like, Tekken, Street Fighter, Virtual Fighter, save that, maybe the occasional cutscene here or there, there are some other genres thrown into the mix every once in a while. It happens less often though recently. But usually every few years or so, you get like an action-adventure or an RPG. You can throw those titles into the mix as well. And we feel that the series' potential is still largely unrealised. It's regretful that that's the case, as I believe the whole Raditz the Boo adventure could really do with a rest, or some kind of additional content which is compelling. That is one thing that Kakarot did do a good job with, providing some extra content and insight. The whole Beastmen thing, that was still kind of cool. So, Haverok and I were talking about this topic and thought, hey, let's geek out about what we would want from the next big Dragon Ball video game title, or two. We also reached out to Rhymestyle, probably one of the biggest aficionados in the Dragon Ball gamosphere, for his thoughts on what we come up with in our findings, which we shall include later on in the video, so do check out his thoughts. But for now, let's show our workings out. You see, since FighterZ is clearly taking up the niche of being the current main competitive fighter, and will most likely stay that way for years to come, or at least until FighterZ 2 comes out, if they ever do it, and by the way, at the time of writing and recording this episode, we still don't have Raditz in there, we should focus on the successor to Xenoverse more, the fabled Xenoverse 3, once Bandai stops adding new stuff to 2, and turning it into a completely different video game. And while you can argue that Kakarot was kind of like Xenoverse 3 in all but name, it was far more problematic though, but not without its charm. It would also be a little unfair to consider it a true sequel. Besides, I went to a press event for Kakarot's release last year at Bandai's UK headquarters, and their clear goal for Kakarot was to have it work alongside Xenoverse and FighterZ, not replacing any of them, in a little trinity of games, catering to different tastes and niches, an all-round mix. FighterZ is for the hardcore group, Kakarot for the RPG crowd, and Xenoverse being the thing that sort of bridges the gap between the two. It's quite a reasonable strategy, but it's not without its flaws. The biggest issue being, especially with the likes of Kakarot, having an open world game that puts you on the reins, as in you are given a sandbox but you can't really explore and be fully rewarded for it, save from some extra tokens, but this strategy, I really don't understand it. It goes against the human condition, sort of. Humans want to poke their noses into things that we shouldn't. It's because of the curiosity factor locked into here. In a way, we do sort of get it, but by the very definition of story-based games, you can't have full freedom of choice and still tell a cohesive story, as open worlders usually give you an illusoric experience. I suppose Breath of the Wild does a better job at this, with at least letting you pick the order of play, or hey, if you're ballsy enough and are able to find the glitch to do so, you can go straight to the boss right you start the game, if you like that sort of thing. We also don't expect a Dragon Ball game to be, let's say, dialogue heavy, like an old style RPG. It's just not the right setting for such a product. And I don't mean to sound patronising or anything, but let's be real. Most Dragon Ball fans would rather see a game that lent more towards fighting mechanics rather than just dialogue and story all the time, unless there was a good skip mechanic. But then that would disappoint the RPG lot and the enthusiasts. You see what we're getting at here? It's really hard to get the right balance than you think. When it comes to the Xenoverse model, the base idea is fine. It does work to some extent, but it would need a little bit of further refinement, especially in terms of how much freedom it gives to the player and which events we can viably affect. With Xenoverse, you can at least get a semblance of meeting other players, upgrading and customizing your characters, somewhat compellingly, or giving Android 18 a bikini, whatever you want to do, whilst going through the story at your own pace, albeit in numbered sections instead of smooth transitions from one story beat to the next. The whole gambit of Xenoverse 2 shtick was supposed to be changing timelines, something that we are very versed in doing here on the MasakoX channel, but especially when it comes to Fuse portion of the story within the DLC. But it mostly ended up with very minor binary choices, not really affecting the main campaign, and it's not hard to see why. We have our own opinions about Fuse as a character, but they're mainly geared towards the version we see in Super Dragon Ball Heroes, so we're going to leave those particular thoughts at the door, for now. Honestly, you have no idea how many times when we write our what-if scripts that we tend to realise that by moving one piece of information to another place, or omitting it altogether, it would either change the whole history or change nothing at all. There is really no in-between. Once we make the change, the effects start to spread outwards, like a ripple effect. The Bardock what-if is a very good example. You start with set parameters that are very small, but as you carry on, the lines blur and expand, and you end up with something that is mostly our creation. That's just how what-if scenarios work. And, you know, it's hard to have that many outcomes in a game as we players, well, we tend to get creative. Also, programmers and creators can only do so much within a game to program and code. This can only be changed when AI in video games becomes a really big thing, that can create stories on the fly, using assets made or easily modifiable, or maybe could be generated off the cuff. That would be the day. Maybe an AI could come up with a viable edition of What If Vegeta Was Female, am I right? But going back to our supposition, if this title that we are clamouring for were to be a new Xenoverse title, Xenoverse 3, or simply a game where we'd be an extra character accompanying Goku and co, maybe don't give us that many things that we can change. There is such a thing as too much, but maybe for the ones and the choices that you do give us, then you make them major, biggies. Make them something that we feel like we are genuinely contributing in some way. Like, for example, in the Saiyan saga. How about you could allow Nappa to survive? By, say, having either a quick time event or a chosen dialogue tree, we can have Goku either stepping in to save Nappa, or just carry on with the same story and let Vegeta do his thing. By us making the choice ourselves, this case the former one, we could have Nappa around perhaps as maybe a companion, or even a mentor. We could learn techniques from him. Or maybe as the player character, we'd advise Goku to finish off Frieza and Namek sooner, not letting the Tyrant power up to 100%. That would make King Cold's interactions with our characters further on much different. Maybe he also would have brought more backup with him instead of just having the one singular ship. Also, instead of exploring a series of scripted missions all the time, like the missions in Xenoverse, which tend to follow the same story over and over again, maybe give our character an original story alongside the original one, that maybe could sometimes overlap at certain points, like with the timelines of certain eras, like in Pokemon. Yeah, you go off on your own adventure, then you meet your rival or friend every so often. It's almost like a helix. They could meet at certain points and then branch off for a while. It keeps it grounded in the initial lore, sure, because you have to get back to a certain point you already know, but it also adds some newness to the overall product. If you really want to appease the really big fans, the super fans we're talking about here, we could even start the game further back in the timeline, around the late OG Dragon Ball period, right before the Piccolo Jr. saga, during those 3 years maybe that Goku was training with Kami. We could, as the character, be a generic sleeper agent for the Galactic Patrol, immune to the passage of time. By doing this This would allow us to run around freely for the sake of providing intel to the Galactic Patrol, aka doing Jarko's job for him. Hey, the initial premise of you being there could be started in a cutscene at the beginning where Jarko is charging us to go and check out Earth for him because he's got important desk work to do. Even though he hates desk work, but yeah, we're an underling, so we have to go and do it anyway. This would then provide us, though, the chance to do our own thing and investigations at our own pace. You know, a new baddie maybe messing with timelines, but in a far less obvious manner than Toa and Mira, like little things. Cooperate with the team only when we have to, when the situation demands it. And we're not talking about huge changes to the timeline here, just very minuscule things, because remember, the littlest change in the past could soon become a major thing further down the line. It's all about patience and subtlety. And the last piece of this train of thought is that it gives us the insight for people who only watch Z about the previous series, a bit of education, whilst having characters they still know. Seeing Piccolo Jr. grow up, Goku training with Kami, Tenshinhan and the rest of the Dragon team doing their thing in that time skip. It's great contextual development for fans who may not be inclined to look back at the first series anime or the manga. Now, I know that a lot of the Dragon Ball game merchandising campaigns are mostly based around nostalgia, but tell me, how many times have you seen Namek exploding recently? Surely it's lost its edge over the years, yeah? How about a mission maybe where we infiltrate the Frieza Force beforehand, saving as many Namekians as we can, instead of just not doing that? Or maybe we could go with Goku to Yardrat and do some chores for him, and the Yardratians, as he does his training, get to know them, given what we know now about said training. If there is one thing that Dragon Ball Z sagas did well is that, we actually saw Yardrat. Basically, we want to take what both Kakarot and Xenoverse 2 promised to do, but were too limited to do by the constraints and overall linear structure. We would fix that here. Make what later Legacy of Goku games did, just on a bigger scale. The games were smaller, but you really felt a bigger sense of freedom within. Because here's the kicker. If you want to give us a linear game, sure, you can do that. But if you are going to do that, just give us a new story. And don't make it, we revive all the villains again thing. That was fun the first 50 times, but I don't think that's going to gel well anymore. We doubt that, though, this is going to happen again, as they were trying to be adventurous with Dragon Ball Z's side story, planned to eradicate the Saiyans. And even then, 4 of the bosses were Frieza and 3 movie villains, so hey, at least I had Hardshak as an original character. Results were indeed mixed, but it just shows it could be done. I know they wouldn't probably get rid of Goku as the leading character in said game, even if we could control our own creation, but think of the potential that a game set in Universe 6 could have. What if instead of jumping through timelines, we could discover other universes? The Tournament of Power has shown us a lot of possible worlds to explore, and hey, we might be able to have a little mini-game where we could build our own Tournament of Power team from different universes to go against other teams from online or within the game. But the fact is that, knowing the sad reality of serialized storytelling, our main cast won't be able to traverse in greater detail, or will we ever see the characters we see in the Tournament of Power ever again. But if we could, let's say, explore them as our own characters and have our mandatory team up with Goku later on, that wouldn't be so bad, would it? What we're getting at here is that Dragon Ball games, despite their huge numbers, rarely focus on, expanding the world, mostly focusing on what we already know. Funnily enough though, the earlier titles were much braver and wackier, but such is the way of success, I suppose. Bandai seems to be too afraid to take a leap of faith like they used to. Nostalgia is a powerful fuel, but even nostalgia can sometimes dry up. It all leads back to our arguments regarding Dragon Ball iconography. When things become iconic, it's immensely hard to break away from it, or else risk alienation. Let's break off and go to Rhyme Style and see what he thinks of our findings.
When it comes down to Dragon Ball games, I feel like we are in the perfect time to be a fan of the games, because as you mentioned, we have Kakarot, which is kind of more like the more laid-back nostalgia game for the RPG fans that allows you to kind of pick up the game, fly around, live in the Dragon Ball universe, live through the story, and you don't necessarily have to try too hard to play the game. It's very easy to pick up and just basically hop in. You got FighterZ, which is the complete opposite side of the spectrum, which is a fighting game. You have to learn, you have to get really competitive with it, you have to improve to play, and really kind of use a lot of brain power to get into the game. And then you got Xenoverse, which is like perfectly in between. I love where we are right now with the Dragon Ball games, but we could always get something new that's a little bit better. That's why I enjoy stuff like Fusions, as well as even Card Warrior, which is part of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, where it's a little bit different. You know, it makes you kind of play the Dragon Ball games in a different realm. But as far as like where else we can go and like the game that you described, I think it would work. The only question I have is like, to me, my most important thing as a fan is what is the gameplay that we're getting. You know, for me, like, I love the 2D style aspect of like FighterZ, where it's an actual fighting game, or I guess 2.5D if you want to call it. And I love the 3D arena fighter that is Xenoverse, because again, I feel like Xenoverse allows you to like, you know, play the game in like a 3D arena where there's somewhat depth to it, as well as it's not too hard to play. You don't have to like get too crazy with it. But I also like when a game does something completely different. So like in your case, you know, with the game that you described, will the gameplay be more like abstract, like Fusions, or are we talking about something more in the realm of like a 3D arena fighter like Xenoverse, or are we talking about RPGs? The reason why this is important is because the number one important factor to Dragon Ball game is replayability. You know, I love Fusions. I could have played Fusions for weeks on weeks when it first came out, but now, like, looking back at it, I feel like I can't really go back and replay those games. Same thing with Kakarot. Kakarot is like probably my top 10 favorite Dragon Ball games of all time. Playing through it once. And now I don't want to go back to play through it again unless they do more story elements, in which case, even that, I'll play once. And then you have games like FighterZ and Xenoverse, which to this day, I still play. Xenoverse is getting like what, to the point where it's almost 5-6 years old, and I'm still playing today. FighterZ obviously is about to wrap up its 3rd year and potentially enter its 4th year. I'm still gonna play that because again, those games give me exactly what I'm looking for in those realms. But something else to point out is I feel like when it comes down to being a bit different and offering the fans a different like realm of how to explore the Dragon Ball realm, there is limitations, you know. I feel like when it comes down to it, it's more on the brand awareness side. The reason why Xenoverse was so limited to what you can and can't do, even with the time travel aspect introduced, is because they were restricted by, you know, head honchos at higher above, where they have to like, you know, kind of keep the series true to its roots, you know? Like, even though in Xenoverse we were able to kind of change time and kind of change a couple things, in our reality, we didn't really get to do that, you know? The outcome was always the same in the end, you know? They still kind of kept it as is, and I guess the whole point was to preserve history. Like, I feel like Shueisha, when it comes down to all their franchises, is all about preserving that same history. So, the other question is how much freedom can we see in the future to the point where we can get something like that? I don't know, honestly. I mean, Dragon Ball Heroes came out at some point, but even Dragon Ball Heroes is not necessarily Dragon Ball anymore, as weird as that sounds. Like, Dragon Ball Heroes started as this one thing, this big what-if story that completely spiraled into its own thing. And I feel like they don't even consider Dragon Ball Heroes as an actual thing, as an actual, like, part of the Dragon Ball IP in Japan. It's kind of weird to explain. But I guess the question comes down to, like, again, how much freedom do they have to make these different kind of games? And two, what is replayability? And I guess that's what's the more important thing to people. Because I feel like, you know, when it comes down to playing stuff like Xenoverse and FighterZ, you can play it at any point. But how often can you play a game like Fusions years down the line, or even a game like Kakarot years down the line? I guess that's a question that gets turned over to the people that watch this video. Like, what do you think? I guess let us know down below.
Also, isn't it kind of crazy that it's been almost 3 years since the release of Dragon Ball Super Episode 131, and we still haven't seen the Tournament of Power acted out in a proper video game format? The Battle Royale genre has been and gone since the Tournament of Power came along. Think what you could have done if that was actually utilized. Think about being able to utilize all those designs in a Battle Royale Dragon Ball game. It's like with the merch. It's all about Jiren, Kefla, and Hit. Very little about the others, even Dispo. So at the end of the day, we're going to be hoping for a game that will allow us to see more of the Dragon World. We've seen some of the familiar scenes way too many times. We want something new, something fresh, or, you know, Dragon Ball Fusions 2 for the Switch Pro? That would do. So what do you folks think? Do our findings make for a very good Dragon Ball game? Or do you feel there are other things that we could do to add to the mix? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!